Hey guys, this is Mike. One quick note before we get started. If you like what we got going on and you want to help support the show, head over to Patreon and give us $1. You can contribute as much or as little as you want to each new episode, and that money's going to go right back into producing the show. If you don't want to do a regular contribution, you can also go over to the GoFundMe page and make a one-time contribution there. Again, that money's going to go right back into the show. It could be as much or as little as you want. Every little bit helps. The links will be in the show notes. Thanks for your support.
314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fire west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Hey, welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike and Jim. Tonight our guest is Mr. James Gagliano. Mr. Gagliano is a West Point graduate. He served as an officer and an Army Ranger. He worked in the FBI for about 25 years. He was also an operator for the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team, HRT. He's been deployed overseas for that assignment. He was in New York on 9/11, working for the FBI. And he retired a few years ago. Since then, he's been working for CNN as their law enforcement analyst. He's been taking a variety of teaching and speaking opportunities related to policing in America. And he's also got some stuff that he's working on right now we're going to get into a little bit later. But mostly what we're trying to convey right now is that he's kind of a big deal, and we're happy to have him here. Thank you for being here, sir.
Well, guys, I appreciate that. I appreciate that wind up, and thank you. I mean, look, the minute I start thinking I'm a really big deal, my wife reminds me that there are dog poops in the backyard that need to be picked up. So I take myself not that seriously, but thank you for the kind words. Looking forward to having a conversation with you guys.
That's good. You're in good company here. All right, so Mike mentioned Hostage Rescue Team, and some people, especially if they're not law enforcement, may not be familiar with what really that is and what a big deal it is. Can you talk us through just, a bumper sticker view? What is Hostage Rescue Team, and how does that fit into the FBI?
Sure. All right. So the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team was established in 1983. Before that, there was actually no mechanism in place in the event that if something needed to happen from a counterterrorism perspective, absent using the military, spec ops like either the SEAL Team 6 or Delta or the Rangers, we didn't have a mechanism in law enforcement to handle that. And you got to think about it from this. You go back in history, the history of law enforcement. The first mass shooting took place in Austin, Texas in the summer of 1966. It wasn't that long ago. There was no such thing as special weapons and tactics before that. And that was kind of the clarion call, I think, for law enforcement. And in the late 60s, early 70s, the FBI began using special weapons and tactics operators, especially at Wounded Knee in 1975. And then as we were moving toward the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, the president and the executive branch looked at it and said to the attorney general, hey, what are we going to do if something happens in Los Angeles? I mean, you look back to 1972 and what happened in Munich when the Israeli athletes were kidnapped and murdered. Do we have something in place that's, that to step above, say, just regular rank and file cops that would be able to respond to that? Because you can't use the military without suspending posse comitatus, and nobody wants to do that unless we're at war or something. Got to establish martial law or something crazy. So they came up with the idea of putting together a super SWAT team, if you will, and the name of the team became the Hostage Rescue Team. It came online in 1983. They basically held an open tryout, and when you're going back to 1983, many of the men that came to try out for the team, they probably had 200 people that originally tried out. They ended up selecting 50 as the original operators, and most of them were or a lot of them were Vietnam vets, Marines, Army, Navy, Vietnam vets, including Tommy Norris, who if you're familiar with the movie Bat 21, was the Navy SEAL that got the Medal of Honor for rescuing a downed airman in Vietnam. So he was one of our first plank holder, first generation guys.
For our listeners, I'd say if you haven't seen the movie Bat 21, I strongly recommend it. It's a hell of a story about a guy who was shot down in Vietnam and what we did to try to rescue him.
That's absolutely. I mean, that is a great recommendation, and Tommy's a legitimate hero, a guy that had his eye shot out, and actually, when he was getting the Medal of Honor pinned on him by President Richard Nixon, Nixon says to him, "Son, is there anything I can do for you?" And he says, "Yeah, hell yeah, I want to be an FBI agent." And he had one eye. And the president said, "You will report to the next academy class that you're available to report to." And Tommy became an agent, and then, like I said, became one of the original plank holders of the FBI's hostage rescue team. So long story short, team comes online. Judge Webster, William Webster, was the FBI director at the time, and came online. And again, its purpose for being stood up was, how are we going to handle the Los Angeles Olympics in the event that we need to do a take back, or if we need to do any type of counterterror operations on U.S. soil. And since then, we just celebrated our 35th anniversary this past January. So we're I guess just about 36 years old. I was generation 12, but in all that time, 36 years, there have only been 33 generations. Gen 33 just came online, and incidentally, this past Thursday, I took a trip down to meet with the new commander. His name is Dave Sundberg, a real patriot, a great FBI agent, and a great leader. And the deputy commander, Russ Humphrey. I just went down and met with him, had lunch, and got a tour of the facilities down there. And as they say, when you leave something, I was there in the late 90s, you always like to come back and see it's in much better hands. It's been taken care of. They got a lot more toys, a lot more capabilities, and it seems that the guys that are doing the operator jobs now are fitter, smarter, stronger, better trained, better equipped, more tactically proficient. Really made me proud to see the operation they got going on down there. So in a nutshell, that's the FBI's HRT. You don't hear about it a lot because they do a lot of missions overseas, and a lot of the missions that they do here, they augment local SWAT teams, or they do high-risk arrests or barricaded subjects. They don't generally get a lot of ink. They're part of that spec ops community, that tier 1 asset for the United States. So I think there's only been a few times you've actually heard their name. They're the ones that arrested the Boston bomber after the Marathon bombing in 2013. And recently, a couple of years ago, they rescued a child that had been kidnapped by a bus driver and taken down into a bunker in Alabama. And they went down and took the kidnapper out and rescued the child.
Yeah.
Yeah, that bunker case is a pretty interesting one. Talk about a nightmare scenario when you're trying to rescue a kid. I want to talk a little bit about
victory. Like unmitigated total victory for the hostage rescue team. I mean, that's a huge win.
Yeah, we'll have to debrief that or try to do a case study on it. So, Jimmy, one of the things that we talk about a lot here is there's a principle from John Boyd. He talks about people, ideas, hardware in that order. And we try to push this on especially young public safety or young military guys, where we talk about, the shooter is more important than the gun. It's not about having all the Gucci gear. It's about having a dude who can make good decisions, work hard, train hard, get it right. And I'm curious how HRT, how the selection has evolved over the years, and what the culture there looks for in a good candidate.
That is and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but that is an outstanding question. And just to show you how important HRT takes selection, they truly consider to be the most important mission that the team does, which is selecting the right people. And to your point earlier, I mean, it's not always, the guy that jumps the highest or runs the fastest or is the deadliest with the steel. It is somebody that makes good judgments in extremis situations. And in extremis is Latin for at the point of death, meaning you're putting yourself in harm's way, or even tougher, you're a team leader or an assistant team leader or a section leader, and you're sending other people into harm's way. So we're looking for people, or the team is looking for, I still feel an affiliation there.
As you should.
Looking for people that they don't have to be Superman. Yes, you have to be physically fit. yes, you have to be handy with the weapons that the team is assigned and uses, and they use many more weapons now. The team has evolved in 36 years, and you have to be handy and good with a variety of assault weapons and a variety of sniper weapons and a variety of handguns and less than lethal devices, explosives, all those kind of things. But judgment is the biggest thing, and that's, I think, what we look for in the 2-week selection, which is, I went through it back in 1995, and it was grueling, and I was a young guy at the time, but it's meant for you to have to make decisions with a lack of sleep and, not feeling like you've eaten enough and feeling like, the worst thing in these type of selection events is it's the unknown. It's just not knowing what the next event is. What is the next evolution? And there's a reason and a purpose for that. I mean, obviously, they can't extend it because these are active FBI agents that are trying out. You can't put it together and make it like buds. You can't make it a year long or like Ranger School, 81 days. You can't make it like the Q course or SFOT. You can't do anything like that. So you really have 2 weeks, and you've got to kind of cram a lot into it, and they do. And it really is a tribute to the original guys that came to the team that put the selection together, because what did they do? They went down to Bragg and they watched how Delta was doing it, and then they went to Dam Neck and they watched how the SEALs did theirs, and there were plenty of guys there from all those units that came to the team in the first generation. So they said, hey, we're going to do this like the SEALs do with the ribs, and make this a boating event. Okay, now we're going to do this this unknown distance run, and then we're going to do this this dog run, then we're going to do this, and they came up with these different things that really pay tribute to all the different military components in Joint Special Operations Command. So yes, being physically fit and being able to deal with the endurance requirements, is that important? Absolutely. But a bigger part of it is, how do you act? How do you conduct yourself? How do you comport yourself under stressful situations and when there's a lot of unknown factors there? And then the other part of it is you spend a significant period of time out in the woods with your fellow selectees, if you will. And is this a person, as they say in the military, that you want to share a foxhole with? And so that's part of the process. So it really is a time-tested now. It's been tweaked, but it really is the same type of selection that began 36 years ago. It has been tweaked and modernized in small places, but you really, just like the Rangers, the SEALs will tell you, it's hard to improve upon success. We know how to make it difficult and arduous for someone, and what we're looking for is somebody that can respond to that and not just survive, but thrive. That's what we're looking for.
You mentioned the modernization and evolution. You came on mid to late 90s, pretty shortly after two of the more famous HRT events, Waco and Ruby Ridge. And we probably don't have time to deep dive those, but can you speak to how the team changed after those events? What the organization learned from it and how they did business differently in light of them?
You guys have really, truly done your homework. So you don't just mail this in where you grab somebody and say, I'm going to try to make up some questions along, on the fly. You're asking the right questions. I came on, literally, I tried out 2 years after Ruby Ridge, which you alluded to, which was Randy Weaver and his family, who was basically a survivalist, and for lack of a better term, I think today the terminology is like a sovereign citizen, someone that doesn't believe in government, and he lived in a remote area of Idaho, and the United States Marshal Service had gone up there, and I believe this was in 1992 to serve a warrant for a gun sale that he had participated in, and a shootout ensued, and a U.S. Marshal, Bill Deegan, was mortally wounded, and the FBI's HRT, again, still somewhat in its infancy. It had done a couple of big operations. It had done the Talladega prison riot and takeover by the inmates down in Talladega, Alabama. They successfully done an operation there, took the prison back, and resulted in no hostages being killed. But they were tested on this one, and we got some blowback on this because the Randy Weaver's wife was killed when one of the FBI HRT snipers, shot at one of the guys that had been shooting at or tried to shoot at a helicopter and was running back into the cabin for sanctuary. And then that was followed by Waco and the Branch Davidian standoff, where David Koresh was this charismatic, cult leader essentially, and apparently had been abusing children and stockpiling weapons and had, machine guns. I mean, literally like 50 cows and things like that. In this instance, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms had gone there to execute warrants there, and 4 ATF agents were killed, and then the standoff occurred. HRT was called in, and what the divisions ended up doing at the end there was burning the entire compound to the ground, and many of them died in the fire or shot themselves or took pills before. But children died in that, and it was a tough operation because HRT took some of the blame for it, because at a certain point in time, the order was given to go ahead and move in and to end this because we were concerned about the children and some of the people there that might not have been able to leave. So as a result of that, there was a big study post-Waco, post-Ruby Ridge, what needed to be done to the team, and of course, one of the issues that came up was you just don't have enough shooters. You just don't have enough trained guys. We got to expand the team. And you know what happens when you have expansion in baseball or football or something like that. It waters down the talent. The team resisted that. There was some pushback. And I came onto the team right in the wake of this report being released saying the team needed to be expanded. And I'm here to tell you today that the team still hovers around those same numbers of 50 or 60 operators now. It has a much bigger tail. It has a much bigger support component. It has a mobility team. It has a full-time air wing. They have, when I was there, we had two Bell 412s, which are like the fancier Hueys from like the Vietnam era, and a couple of Little Birds. Now the team has a whole flight wing of Blackhawks, and their capabilities. They do halo jumps. We did fast roping and rappelling, of course, in my day, but the team is just, as I said, to use the term modernized. It has just continued to meet the growing or emergent threats, and I think a big part of that was spending time. I had just left the team and then got called back to go to Afghanistan shortly after the war started, and it was a big eye-opener. We were, not just from the military perspective, because other than Grenada and Panama and a couple of small conflicts or, some special operations, dust-ups, America hadn't been in a war since Vietnam ended in 1975. So it was eye-opening, and there were a lot of lessons learned. And through the course of the last 17 years that we've been in war in Afghanistan, and of course the Iraq War was, I think, just short of a decade, HRT operators have been assigned in the sandbox. So they were attached to the different JSOC elements, and they've gone out and, helped interrogate high-value targets when they get rolled up, and they've fast-roped in and parachuted in and humped over mountains and gotten into firefights. We've lost men over there. So there's been a real kinship with the military, and I think one of the things that, when I use the term modernize, just bringing us into this new paradigm for the team and for the law enforcement and for the country, if you will. They've just gotten a ton of experience over there. So most of the guys that are on the team that have been there for any period of time now, they've all been overseas, multiple deployments. Now, they don't do 12 or 13 or 11-month tours like the military does, but they do 3-month tours. They'll do a 90-day tour. One section will rotate over. They'll come back in to retrain, refit back here in the States, and the other team will go over and do it. So they've been doing that for a long time, and I think that's had a huge influence on the team's capabilities and the team's experiences, and it's basically hardened the guys that are doing the job now. So I think that's a good thing.
So about that, and I don't want to put you on the spot with this, but many Americans have expressed concern about the militarization of law enforcement, and you have throughout our discussion talked about comparison between HRT and SEALs and Rangers and their combat deployments in Afghanistan. And if you look at a YouTube video of them, and I recommend people do, it looks a lot like a SEAL team doing SEAL team stuff, right? It looks a lot like high-end Army Soft doing high-end Army Soft stuff. And can you comment on or kind of explain to people who might be uncomfortable with the militarization of law enforcement why it's okay, and the difference between the appearance and the, what makes you not just the Army rolling in on a domestic hostage rescue event?
Sure. Well, I think one important thing to do right now is to make the distinction between law enforcement's role and the military's role. We send our military to fight wars and win. That's what they do. That's what they're good at. That's what they're trained to do. We pick the best of the best to be in the elite units for that. That's their job. Their job is to go fight and win. That's it. From the law enforcement perspective, I guess it's a much more. There are so many different integrated functions and missions. I mean, everything from a lonely patrol officer, driving down Highway 66 and seeing a car with a broken taillight on a lonely stretch of highway and having to make a stop by themselves, not knowing that the guy behind the wheel just killed his wife and he doesn't know why he's being stopped, but he's gonna. There's that. There's courtroom security. There's investigation. Something happens, whether it's a kidnapping or a bank robbery or counterintelligence, theft of state secrets, to pedophilia, to dirty cops, to civil rights violations, to just a whole host of things. And I guess the biggest difference is, in law enforcement functions, we don't use suppressive fire. There's a difference between, the things the military does, like a movement to contact, than what you do in law enforcement. But then again, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, we have fugitive squads, and, in every police department, every federal agency has a fugitive squad that goes out to hunt down men that are wanted for, violent crimes. And that's similar to what we do in the military overseas. But there's a very big distinction. I mean, there's no suppressive fire in law enforcement.
And, and we're not seeking violence necessarily, but sometimes we live in a violent world, right?
Right, and I think in that different world, it's difficult because people then see SWAT operators wearing flight suits or wearing drop holsters or wearing ballistic helmets and night vision goggles, and they think, well, this is wrong. You look like an occupying army. The problem is with the weapons that are out there and the commitment from the bad guys. I mean, the shootout in San Bernardino, California in 2015, and the running gun battle, without having an armored personnel carrier that you could safely deliver law enforcement folks there to take this couple down, more good guys would get hurt, and not just people in law enforcement, but collateral damage as far as civilians getting hurt along the way. So I think there's a fine line there between, yes, we want a distinction between our military and our law enforcement. That's very true, absolutely. But the skills that are utilized and learned in the military do have value in some, and I'm going to be some law enforcement functions.
What's the motto of HRT?
So the motto in Latin is Servari Vitas, and that stands for to save lives. So the job is to go in, do whatever it takes, put their lives at risk, like many law enforcement and military folks are prepared to do. But the job is to get in and to save lives. I mean, it doesn't matter if you go in and it's a successful mission. You take out the bad guys, the hostage holders, and 2 or 3 hostages get killed in the aftermath of it. I mean, that's not a successful mission. There's a distinction in law enforcement, the saving lives business. It's not just, like I said, from the military perspective, where you have a job to go and defeat the enemy, and that's just we've got to win that. Yes, you got to do that too on the law enforcement end, especially in the tactical resolution business, if you will, but you can't have you can't lose hostages, and so to save lives, Servari Vitas has been the motto of the hostage rescue team since 1983.
I work on a SWAT team at my department, and someone on my team somewhere along the way stole that from you guys, and so it's also our motto. turns out. But
hey, listen. The bottom line is, there's only so many words in the English language. There's only so many concepts.
In Latin.
It's like when I lecture on leadership. It's like there's not a lot of new things you can talk about leadership that Alexander the Great or Hannibal didn't figure out centuries ago. So there's no problem with that. I'm pretty sure the hostage rescue team has borrowed a few things from their law enforcement partners in other realms. along the way. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, but the sentiment is a big deal, and I know when we talk about an active shooter is the first thing that comes to mind with law enforcement, just the rank and file, not the guys that are on specialized teams, but your everyday first responder. Going and mitigating one of these active shooter incidents, that's absolutely the forefront of our mind, right? Is to close with and kill the guy that's taking innocent lives, and so there's a careful dichotomy that has to come with that, but to be ready and prepared, not only mentally, but also have the proficiency and the skill set to be able to do that requires, a little bit of that mindset. And we could go down this path of the warrior guardian thing, but it's one of those things.
Along those lines, a lot of the scariest looking military looking stuff, that when you see it in law enforcement capacity, that's the defensive stuff. Armor is to keep the bullets from hitting me. It's not to, smash, the innocent people of City X. Whereas in the military, we have the armor, but we also have a big old cannon that we're using to demolish stuff with that you don't see typically in law enforcement, right?
So this is actually a good intro into the next thing that I wanted to talk about. And Jimmy, when you came out and you came to our department and you gave a talk, and one of the things that came up was the Ferguson Effect, and it's something that you're working on in your research now. And I'm curious if you could explain that for us and kind of what you think the problem is or was, and what the solution is.
Sure. So, I mean, the Ferguson Effect was first described by James Comey in a speech that he gave at Georgetown. I believe it was in February of 2015, and it was I think the name of the speech, which your listeners can Google or look up, was race and policing, hard truths. And what he wanted to do was be the first FBI director. There have only been 8 in the 110-year history of the FBI, and he was one of the 8. He wanted to acknowledge that, yes, we in law enforcement need to be cognizant of the fact that, hell, back there when we were just 13 colonies, law enforcement was originally stood up, sometimes in some areas for wrong reasons. I mean, the purpose was to track down runaway slaves or to keep the order, but the order meant, hey, we've got an agrarian culture here, and we have, men in bondage, and we want them to know that there's a night watch out there. So there is an onerous past that we have to deal with and grapple with and confront and be honest about. But as I say all the time, the amount of folks, I think there are like 1.1 or 1.2 million folks under uniform in this country, in a country of 335 million. The amount of folks that join the ranks of law enforcement that are racist or bigoted or hold deep-seated prejudice are such a infinitesimal, tiny slice of the population. The vast majority of cops are good people that go in because they want to protect and serve. So in regards to the Ferguson Effect, Comey brought this up as he acknowledged that, hey, law enforcement isn't perfect, and we make mistakes, and sometimes, we don't do a good job of getting out in front of them or acknowledging them or weeding out the infinitesimal few that need to be weeded out, and we need to confront that. But we also need to acknowledge that in some communities, especially in impoverished communities in this country, they're dangerous places to work, and that cops, young, idealistic, imbued with the right sense of duty and honor, that are entering into those places to work, it can have an effect on them. And he talked about that. And then he acknowledged what had happened in 2012 with the death of Trayvon Martin and the man that's George Zimmerman, who was a night watchman or something, or neighborhood watchman who killed Trayvon Martin, and it sparked when he was found not guilty. It sparked some riots and some arguments that arose from the civil rights community about, hey, there's two sides of justice in this country, and sometimes people of color aren't given the same justice. And then that led into the summer of 2014, and you had the Michael Brown shooting out in Ferguson, Missouri, and then it was followed by Freddie Gray's death while in custody of the Baltimore Police Department. And then you had a number of police officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as well as in Dallas, and twice 2 officers executed in in Brooklyn, followed by another female officer executed a year or two later while she was sitting in her patrol car. And so what Comey was trying to get out in front of was, hey, when we watch these things, these uprisings, these riots, and some of these movements, and I'm not suggesting that Black Lives Matter is a hate group at all. I think it started for the right reasons, but I think there are probably folks that are involved in it that do have an anti-police view of things, and some of this stoked up some fires and might have inspired or motivated some of the people that referenced it when they killed police officers. And so what Comey talked about was this effect, and it's also called the viral video effect, meaning every time a police officer goes out to try to do their duty, there's a group of people that now stand out there with cell phone cameras and video them or shout at them or, and in some instances obstruct governmental administration or obstruct justice because they're stopping police from doing what they're trying to do, which is their jobs. And so Comey talked about the viral video effect and the Ferguson effect, and what the suggestion was is that it doesn't mean that cops aren't doing their job, but the cops that come onto the job, like I did as an FBI agent in 1991, I'm sure you guys did when you came on the job, you wanted to go get the bad guys, move to the sound of the guns, go get the bad guys, do my damn job. And Comey's suggestion was, and a lot of people, a lot of theorists and folks that study Homeland Security and criminal justice and police sciences are suggesting that it's not that cops aren't responding to calls. It's not that if a cop doesn't see a crime on the street, they're not making an arrest. That's not it. But proactive policing might be a thing of the past. Proactive policing is something where in New York we had stop, question, and frisk, which was if an officer with a requisite amount of experience saw something that didn't look right to that officer because of their experiences and their training, they knew that somebody standing on this street corner at 2 o'clock in the morning looking around furtively and adjusting a lump in their sweatpants in the front of their belt line, that probably meant there was a high probability they were carrying an illegal firearm. Now, if the officer went up and talked to that person, then they had to get more information and then make a determination on whether or not that person was to be frisked or not. And New York took off, I can't tell you how many guns over the course of the number of years that it was in place. Well, now that those things are being assailed by folks that look at those things and think that they're, racially motivated or, racist because, it happens more frequently in the inner city and in communities that are predominantly, of color, whether it's inside New York City or in Baltimore or in East St. Louis or wherever it is. A lot of departments don't employ that tactic anymore. And that is kind of indicia of what I think the Ferguson effect is, meaning a cop drives by and sees something like that now, absent the crime happening in front of them, that they are duty bound and that they would certainly be motivated to step out, put their lives on the line and go make an arrest in a potentially violent situation or confrontation. They just don't have that kind of, I'm going to follow my spidey sense and I'm going to try to get out in front of something that could happen later. Maybe that crime is not happening right now, but that guy in possession of that, what looks like an illegal firearm in his waistband, is probably going to commit a crime later. Maybe I can save somebody else's life. That is the argument, is that Ferguson effect mean that cops aren't doing that. Not that they're not doing that, but they're not doing that with the same frequency that they used to do. And my argument is, and my hypothesis is, ultimately, as we go forward and I get more data and study this and further flesh it out and research it, it is going to make us less safe.
To kind of put a bow on that, one of the things that I push, hopefully, in Tactical Tangents is that every policy, every tactic, you have to stop and think about the unintended consequences. And any change that has come from Ferguson, some of them good, some of them bad, had both the intended consequence of improving race relations and police minority relations, that sort of thing. But you always have to watch out for unintended consequences. And I know a number of people in the communities who really don't want the cops going out of their way to make contact. They want to be left alone. And I understand it. I want to be left alone personally. But the trade-off is you're letting that dirtbag be left alone, and he's going to go do bad things.
This is my take on some of this, and because this is what I see locally is you have stuff where you mentioned the 2 a.m. the guy that's walking on the street corner, and you see him do something that's minor, right? You see him do something like jaywalk, and you go to contact that guy, and he runs away.
You shot him for jaywalking,
right? Well, that's the slippery slope that we go down. But I see a lot of cops that. Well, now this guy runs away and he's going through over walls into neighborhoods. He's hiding some lady's shed in her backyard because we didn't chase him. And so there's this balance of like, well, yeah, I get it. You don't want to go jack this guy up because he was jaywalking. But the flip side of that argument is, do you think that he ran because he was jaywalking?
Right, and I think that speaks to another policy that basically was first written about in the Atlantic in probably I think the early '80s, maybe 1982, by two researchers who coined the term broken windows policing, and what that was, and obviously it was used to great effect by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani during his tenure as mayor of New York City, and obviously with Bill Bratton, the architect and Jack Maples, the police officers, the police chief, and one of his senior lieutenants, and then further when Ray Kelly took over, it was they continued to drive crime down in New York City down to all-time lows, and it was by employing this methodology that said if you allow the little crimes to proliferate, and you can argue, well, jaywalking is nothing because who amongst us hasn't done it? I do it going to CNN sometimes. Across the street from my car to get to the front entrance, of course. But if you allow the smaller,
I'm shocked.
Man, the turnstile jumpers, you allow those to proliferate, it leads to bigger ones, and that's kind of what your point was right there with the stopping somebody on the jaywalking.
Yeah, and so this is a careful thing to balance, and to be honest, it's one of the things that in your presentation that you gave at my department that really struck me was we have to address some of those bigger issues without hamstringing ourselves in the smaller issues. And to kind of unpack that a little bit, what I mean is I want cops to think clearly enough to realize that, hey, you don't have a lot on this guy. You've got, he fled from you from a minor pedestrian traffic violation. It's not the end of the world. But you also have to have that ability to apply critical thinking and say, like, well, there's probably more to this story. So, I can't approach this the way I would if I think he just did a robbery. It's a different approach, but that doesn't mean that I just have to let it go. And so there's an accountability that happens with law enforcement. And I think that you spoke to this. I'll let you kind of give your spin on it, but I think we have to create this culture in law enforcement that, we can have high standards and still hold ourselves accountable without taking away our ability to do our job effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people ask me all the time, I have great respect for law enforcement. Obviously, I cut my teeth under NYPD cops on FBI task forces back in the early 90s, drug task forces, organized crime task forces, immense respect for them. One of the arguments I always make about a benefit that the FBI has, in basically forming, in building, creating FBI agents, is the fact that there's a maturation process that is not guaranteed, but that's baked in when you say, hey, listen, to apply to the FBI, you have to have a 4-year college degree, and you have to have 3 years of practical work experience. And if that practical work experience is being a cop or being a school teacher or being a political speechwriter or working at your local Walmart as a greeter, as long as you've got some type of leadership position, whatever that is, we want you to be 26, 27, 28, 30 when you come in. Police departments don't have that benefit, first of all, because, let me give you a number. There are 12,000 FBI agents in the entire world. There are 36,000 police officers in the New York City Police Department alone. So for every FBI agent, there are 3 New York City cops. So, I mean, that just tells you that it's a much smaller group of people to be working with. And obviously police departments have to, they've gotten much better about requiring, hey, an associate's degree or military service beforehand, or not hiring somebody at 17 and asking them to make judgments with a badge and a gun, because no matter how good their intent is, they're just not old enough. They don't have the experience that comes with age and seasoning. That, people ask me all the time, well, how many people just shoot on the job? And how many? Listen, being handy with the steel is important because you never know when you might need it. But the vast majority of folks that are in law enforcement go through an entire career without ever squeezing the trigger other than on the range. And I always talk about how vastly more important my ears and eyes and mouth was in being able to diffuse situations, or being able to recognize situations that might go sideways, or being able to talk to somebody. So I think that has a big part of it is making sure, we always talk about, when a shooting happens, a questionable shooting, and people scream about, well, they're just not properly trained. And I said, yeah, but if you look at the video and you look at the circumstances and what went down, what would you have done in real time? Because we have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. We get to slow down the video. We get to talk about it. We get to hear what everybody else thinks about it. But we weren't there in the dark making a decision, life or death consequences in real time. Now, just because you're older, just because you're 28 versus 22 or 35 as opposed to 26, that's not the end-all cure-all. Just because you have a 4-year degree versus a 2-year, that's not the end-all cure-all. It's just experience and trying to teach cops, trying to teach law enforcement officers when they're in their academies, that ability to be able to, like you talk about, recognizing something that could lead to something worse, recognizing something that's petty and saying, hey, listen, maybe that's one where I don't need to start a confrontation over that, but in this instance, I do. This is one where I have to draw the line and say this is it. So I think it's a lot of things, and I think the fact that we're talking about it, and that that folks like you guys that are on the job and doing this are interested in the theories behind it and interested in what can we do to get better, what can we do to, because we're going to get to a point, guys, where we're not going to be able to drive crime down any lower, because with the exception of a few places like, East St. Louis and Chicago, really across the country in big cities, New York is a perfect example. I entered in 1991, my first year as an FBI agent. At the end of that year, New York suffered 2,245 homicides. Last year, they had 290, the fewest amount of homicides since the 1950s. I mean, that's a 95% reduction in murders. Now, every year we look at it and go, wow, we went from 330 to 320. Oh, this year we're down to 290. Next year, 287. But at some point in time, just the law of averages and the fact that you cannot drive crime down to zero, it's going to start to come back up. Now, the question is, how far back up do we want to allow it to come to? Is it just going to be small ticks and adjustments that happen because, people are different, things happen? Or is it going to be because of policies that have been put in place that are either causing crime to proliferate, where bad guys start to think, hey, I can get away with this because the cops can't do this, so are they bad policies? Or, are we just making our young folks that are coming in, putting on the badge and the gun, are we just better preparing them? And I think that's the job of people like me, and I'm appreciative and really I'm kind of proud of guys like you that are still working, that are looking at it too and saying, how do we get better at this? How do we keep ourselves safe and the community safe? And how do we get better at this, at driving crime down and doing it in a smart way? And that's the thing. I mean, these are the kind of things that we can debate and have, we can have arguments and discussions about them or whatever. But the goal really at the end of the day is, how do we continue to drive crime down? We'll never be able to stamp it out completely, but keep it at really low levels. How do we keep our guys safe? And how do we not make the communities that we work in think that we are an occupying force? That right there is the $1 million question.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's if only we had the answers. And, when we talk about this accountability thing, I think cops are always very quick. I mean, first of all, there's about 6 different directions I can go with this, but I had a light bulb that I'm gonna see if you can illuminate for me a little bit. But I think cops have this tendency to blindly defend each other. You know, a cop gets in a shooting, and very quickly they want to just say, "Oh, well, unless you've worn a badge and a gun and blah blah blah," and you know, it's like you're not really doing us any favors when you do that. And that's why I think it's awesome that we get to have you on the show, because for a living on CNN, that's what you're doing nowadays. In addition to your research and the stuff that you got going on, but where we have to take that is, I need everyday cops to use some critical thinking and to look at those issues, at any individual controversial police shooting or whatever, and try to say what could make this different. And I think a good analogy for this, and it's not really an analogy, it's a practical thing, but it's pursuit policies. And I struggle with this because I look at pursuit policies, and to some degree, I'll go back to my jaywalking example for a second, where I say, you know, if this guy runs from the cops, it's probably not because he was jaywalking, and now he's hiding in Nana's backyard in the shed, and we just leave him there. We don't do anything. That's not really fair to her when she wakes up to do her gardening in the morning and finds some drunk guy that's passed out in her shed. And to some degree, I think that we have some expectation by the public to go after the bad guys. And nowadays, we have to balance things like liability, risk to ourselves, risk to other members of the public, and we have to make that decision where, you know, maybe it's not worth chasing this guy. But how do we draw that line? Where do we find the balance? You know, because it's hard. We want to catch the guy.
It is, man. It goes back to, again, what you just said a second ago with, you know, I say all the time that, you know, the cops, the dirty cops, and there's such a small amount of them, or the cops that, you know, use excessive force, meaning, you know, they decide to on the use of force continuum, they decide to go from 0 to 60 when 0 to 20 would have worked for your purposes, and they give us a bad name, right? Because then we've got to explain to people why did Michael Schlager shoot Walter Scott in the back as he was running away in North Charleston? And you go, I said, gosh, you know, my first look at these things, and I've seen so many. I'm 25 years on the job, not just as an FBI agent, but working on, you know, New York City Police Department task forces. So I understand the mindset and the mentality of guys in these positions. I do. And I always want to your point, give the benefit of the doubt. But I got to be a straight shooter. In the issue, in the instance of Michael Schlager, that was an execution. There was no way that any cop in his right mind, I mean, some tried, but no decent person could look at that and suggest that he had a right to do that. Or, well, you never, like you said, you've never won the badge. That is a tough thing to do, but I do think it helps having been there to be able to illuminate folks that don't sense the danger or don't sense what that's like. And especially now, look at the job you guys have to do. I didn't have to deal with, through much of my career, people with video cameras, you know, and cell phones out there, and the much more outspoken, vocal, rude, disrespect. The cops have always had to deal with disrespect and rudeness, and that's just part of the business. You got to turn the other cheek. But not to the extent that there is now, especially with, you know, these flash mobs that can be whipped up on social media, and these movements that, you know, can show up in an instance and you know, have people congregate. Your job is just exponentially more difficult. It is just so much more difficult. But again, I go back to what you said at the top of that is, we've got to demand, not expect, but demand that each of us, you know, folks that are on the job, each of us holds everyone accountable. Because when you do the what we call the thin blue line thing, where people on the outside look at the thin blue line, they don't sense it for what the term really meant, which was, we're the thin blue line that stands between you and anarchy, between you and, pushing robbery at your house and lawlessness. We're that thin blue line. They look at it and they say, well, the thin blue line is if you do something wrong, your partner is never going to snitch on you. He's never. So see, there's a no snitching thing in law enforcement. And when these things happen, and they do happen, it gives us a black eye, and then it makes it that much tougher for us to gain trust on the outside. It's difficult. It goes to leadership and it goes to culture, and that's a whole separate thing from my West Point background, where I want to say it really starts at the command level, the culture there. Yes, in large police departments where you've got 35 or 36,000 cops in New York City, the police commissioner does not have interaction with every single cop on the beat there. It's impossible. But he sets the tone. He establishes culture. And that goes down to his 5 or 6 hand-picked people underneath them. And then each of them have 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people under them. And each of them, and it spreads out into that pyramid. It starts with culture. What is going to be tolerated? In this department, is that tolerated? Is it, maybe it's not tolerated, but it's like, well, we're just not going to make a big deal of it, or unless they ask for us, so we're not going to be transparent. Lack of transparency in law enforcement is a killer, because what it does is it results in the community not trusting you, and when the community doesn't trust you, that causes folks to act differently. And what that does, that means is, the person that might not have been inclined to run does, or the person that might not have been inclined to struggle or resist or fight or attack you does. So yeah, it matters.
Yeah, I've seen that, and the thin blue line thing drives me up the wall. Because like you mentioned, it's less of a line between us and them now. Now it's more of like, I think of it just like two shades. There's a blue and then there's a black, and that's really it. We do this. It's divisive and it doesn't help. I go back to that.
I agree.
I go back to that shooting that you mentioned, and I remember that came up in the talk that you gave us, and one of the points that you made was like, yeah, imagine that. Look, here I am telling a room full of cops that I think that was a bad shooting. And this came up when I looked at the, I think it was Daniel Shaver was at the Mesa, the hotel,
right. Yeah.
The hotel shooting. And I remember looking at that one and thinking like, yeah, I get it. You could probably try to pick that apart and justify it, but I think it was a bad shoot. There's a dozen things that you could do better there, but again, we go back to this thing where cops do a bad job of explaining the complexity there and looking at it in the black, the white, and the gray.
And we touched on this in a previous episode about personality. I just want to hit it because we've got this cool opportunity right now that because of the types of personalities that become law enforcement and military and civilian defense, we tend to have communities that that have a lot of issue with taking criticism, and they feel like they get a lot of criticism. And you cops do get a lot of criticism, and military in various times has gotten a lot of criticism. I'm sensitive about it, but that doesn't mean all criticism is wrong. And you also have to be able to be a little nuanced, and we tend to have very rigid personalities, and nuance is hard for us, and the gray area is hard for us, and it's hard for us to say it was maybe justifiable as a shoot. The cop maybe shouldn't go to prison for the rest of his life, but that doesn't mean it was a good shoot and that I want to do more of it, right? We can say that. We can have that conversation without hating cops.
Well, the other side of that is I go back to, and Jimmy brought it up, was the leadership thing.
Yep.
And it's not just the guy at the top. To me, I look at law enforcement, members of law enforcement are supposed to be community leaders. And that means that we should be able to be in front of anybody or any crowd or each other and be the bigger person or whatever, or step up and lead a little bit and say that, as soon as we get met with that criticism, hey, that's an opportunity to not only learn for ourselves, but also let's pick this apart and take the opportunity to explain how difficult these decisions can be. It doesn't mean that there's not lessons learned or that it was okay or whatever, but maybe that's the difference between, hey, this guy's going to go to prison for the rest of his life, and maybe he just doesn't need to be a cop anymore. That's the leadership component.
Yeah. And that's perfectly put, because and that's, I think, something that I try to do in a limited platform that I do have, is to say, hey, cops aren't infallible.
And by limited, he means on CNN.
It's this little thing, little outlet.
And it's so true. And just,
Might have heard of
just
it.
to go back to the point that you were making about the Daniel Shaver shooting, I wrote a piece for CNN Opinion on that, and I was pretty harsh on that one. And I thought about it afterwards, and I went back and said, in hindsight, should I have softened this or softened that? And I said, no, I spoke as a former SWAT team commander. I spoke as a guy who had been in a hallway like that a gazillion, that's with a G, times. And
Approximately.
I understand what it's like to be there. No, I was not there. And yes, to your point again, could I have articulated a way? Could I have been called as an expert witness, as a guy that for 33 years was in the tactical resolution business? Could I have been called as an expert witness for the defense and said, yes, I could have interpreted this to mean this, or yes, I could have intuited that to mean that? Yes, I certainly could have, but it goes again to that point that we're all not built for this. I don't think Daniel Shaver's a bad kid. I don't think he went there with malice aforethought. I just think he made a bad choice. He made a bad decision. And when you weighed all those factors, and I know for some of your listeners that aren't aware of that story, they can go back and look at it. But I just looked at it, the totality of the circumstances. It goes back to a very famous Supreme Court case, and Graham v. O'Connor, which I believe was decided in 1968, and it said, we don't judge police actions by what a regular person would do. We judge them by what a reasonable officer should be expected to do. Did they use the requisite amount of force, or did they brutalize somebody? Did they take a life because that was necessary and prudent and they had to? Or did they take a life because that was what they decided to do instead of using, all these other less than lethal implements that they had at their disposal and just chose not to? What would a reasonable officer do? And I think that's something that, again, going back to something that one of you guys had mentioned earlier, which was we got to do a better job of explaining that. We've got to do a better job of having surrogates out there. And look, I welcome any opportunity on CNN for that to happen. I mean, thankfully, there hasn't been a shooting that's been scrutinized or that CNN has been, had up on loop in recent vintage, but certainly if there is, and I'm certain there will be one in the future, in the near future at some point in time, because it's a law of averages. I mean, think about it. Last year in the United States, there were 10 million arrests. 10 million. Now, for every arrest, there has to be 10 or 20 law enforcement interactions with the public that could result in arrest but didn't result in arrest. So think about that. In all of those, that's the other thing we don't do a good job of pointing out. All those arrests, all those interactions, and there are a minuscule amount of shootings, and there are a tiny infinitesimal amount of bad ones. Last year in 2017, here are the numbers. Unarmed people shot by police, 30 Caucasians, 20 African Americans, and 13 Hispanics. It's not the numbers that people think. It's not hey, you're targeting a particular community. But we don't do a good enough job of talking about those things, of having the facts at our avail, and then making the case. And the converse to that is admitting when mistakes are made. It wasn't comfortable with me to write a piece that went to CNN and then to Newsweek, where I suggested that Michael Schlager should have gotten the death penalty, or at minimum he should have gotten life, and he got 20 or 25 years, and that was just the best they could do under the statute that they charged him with. But it's tough. I don't like to do it. I don't relish it, and there are people in blue that go, well, you're a traitor for doing that. I'm like, I call it the right way, the same way as if somebody on my job did that and they were my partner. We have to do the right thing. It goes back to, again, the West Point training, which the motto is duty, honor, country. Duty is what we do. Honor is how we do it, and country is why we do it. And I think every police officer, in some way, shape, or form, adopts that motto or lives that motto or has been shown that motto in no uncertain terms, and really that should be the guiding principle in the way that we all act.
I agree on the accountability stuff, and I can't. and there's a lot of angles we can take that. Well, if we're going to be accountable, then we also have to look at some of the other issues. And yeah, could the training be better? And could people better fund us or better resource us and all those things? Yeah, those are all things, but it doesn't take that personal responsibility. And part of that duty comes to remembering who you're serving. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a fine line because you understand why people in the military and people in law enforcement have this fraternity, because you are doing things that the average person would never do. And as such, you feel a kinship. And, it goes back to the old thing when they asked World War II soldiers why they were fighting. Was it to defeat Hitler and stop the fascist, overtake of the world? Was it to beat the Axis powers? Was it to do this? Was it, for God? Was it for country? Was it for mama at home? And invariably the answer was no. It's for the guy next to me in the foxhole. That's who I'm fighting for. And really, unless you've been in extremist situations, unless you've been in situations where your life and the people that you work with, and pretty great frequency are in situations that could result in death, people don't understand what that's like. So I understand. But I understand, but I obviously don't agree with people that would say, I want to protect this person at all costs. We have to do the right thing in all situations. The public expects us to do it. We swear an oath. And again, one or two bad shoots, one or two cases of cover-ups, and what does that do for our relationship, for every cop's relationship with the general public? It just makes them trust us less, and it puts future cops in dangerous positions because of it.
Credibility is freedom. Credibility is currency. And if you burn it for something stupid, you're putting yourself in danger. You're putting generations of people in danger. You and Mike have both talked about leadership and the need to develop communication and public communication. I think that in the past you've talked about more education for cops and maybe even advanced degrees for cops. Is that something you can talk to us about?
Yeah, it's not easy to do. I see every now and then you'll see a police chief in some department or even at the NYPD where somebody, goes to the training unit, and instead of spending a tour there of, 4 or 5 years, whatever, then going back to a precinct, they just kind of stay there for 15 years. And while they're there, they manage to get their master's and their PhD, and they do it on company time. And I see some police departments where, and I won't mention any particular, but one close to where I live, where the police chief was gone for like 3 years pursuing a doctoral degree, and he did it on, it was in the Homeland Security realm, so it was taxpayer funded. And what did that do? Well, it left the deputy there in charge to run the department. I kept saying to myself, man, I'm in the FBI for 25 years. There's no way I could have, especially if you have a family. And I'm not saying that people can't take night courses and things like that. But if you're doing the job and you are committed to it and you are, a go-getter, as you pointed out earlier, as most people in this line of work are, it's just hard to think that you can really do righteous by your job and still have time to get a doctoral degree. Now, having said that, are there programs available where I know the FBI does it? I never took advantage of it, but I know that the people that did it, and it was a wonderful program. I know in some police departments they do as well, sometimes through like grants through Homeland Security, where you could go to the Naval Postgraduate School and take courses to get a certificate or to get a master's. And I don't know about the terminal degree part, but is that important? Hell yes, it's important. Is that a good thing? Yeah, I'm scrambling now to get my higher learning done, because I understand that a practitioner without being a theorist is really, I don't want to say he's not as useful in the afterlife or in the second act, but you're far more effective if you've got the practitioner goods, you've actually been there, done that, been in the fight, and then you can articulate it and you can discuss it and you can research it and add offerings to the research of, will this work, and what about this theory, and how can Homeland Security, how can we keep the homeland safer, more secure, and more resilient? What can I do to do that? So, yeah, I think there's a place for it. One of my big heroes in the military, is General Stanley McChrystal. I, through blind sheer luck, bumped into him on an elevator at CNN on the way to the green room a couple weeks ago, and he was very gracious and gave me a copy of his new book, and I don't get a piece of the action here, so I'm not shilling for it, but his new book on leadership, which I told him I was a big fan of Team of Teams, and he autographed a copy and gave it to me. But one of the things that I really appreciated about his tenure, in charge of operations over in Afghanistan and the surge and what he's written about, and was the fact that he encouraged so many of his junior officers to get advanced degrees. And it goes back to that great Greek philosopher Thucydides that said, a nation that makes a distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. So, that's just really an impactful thing that was said thousands of years ago, because it just gets to the heart of it. You can't just be good at your job. You can't be technically and tactically proficient. You really, really, really have to be a scholar in this business. And, like I said, I'm doing it bass backwards. I'm doing it, I had the career, and now I'm going back and studying. And I wish some of these things that I'm learning now and that I'm researching now, I had thought about or had been exposed to when I was still in the ranks. But yes, I think that's it's paramount now. It's definitely a thinking man's game, and I'm happy to see that there are opportunities out there for folks to advance their education, and while they're still young enough and still making an impact on the job.
You that cowards and fools quote's one of my favorites as a book nerd. I don't have any advanced degrees, but I read a lot, and that's one of my favorite go-tos. I want to wrap up because we've taken a bunch of your time, but I have a couple. You actually set me up perfectly for one of my last questions, and it's: do you have any favorite books, or especially books that you think every cop or military guy should read,
or movies?
Yeah, I absolutely will tell you. Team of Teams, which was General McChrystal's first book, and he had some of his staff officers write it with him, and he's very, very humble about that fact. But Team of Teams is probably one of the. I teach organizational leadership at St. John's. Obviously, as we've been talking about it tonight, it's something that's very important to me. I lecture on it at the United States Military Academy for a group called the Thayer Leader Development Group, which talks to corporate clients on leadership. So leadership is really important to me because it's just something I think that affects everything, and the value added or the impact that good leaders can have on organizations is incalculable. So Team of Teams is, of all the leadership books that I own and all the ones that I've read, is probably one of the finest. There's enough historical connections in there where it goes back to the Battle of Trafalgar to describe, a famous naval battle in world history, and how asymmetrical warfare works, and why commanders that trust their junior leaders and give them their opportunity and the audacity to operate on their own are really, again, adding value to the mission. And unfortunately, everything that we do today, whether it's in the military, we don't line up like we did in the Civil War. You line your troops up, I'll line up mine, and we'll just keep shooting each other until I've either killed more of yours or you've killed more of mine. And then the people the unit with the most people left, you hold the field. Well,
Rochambeau.
Everything is asymmetrical today, from the way business is to the way the military organizations fight insurgents to the way we deal with things in law enforcement. Law enforcement is so much more dangerous, so much more complex, homeland security as well. So asymmetrical warfare, asymmetrical thinking, I highly recommend that book, Team of Teams by General McChrystal.
I'll have to add it to my list on our website. And the last thing I want to ask you about is when you're in your leadership talk that you did here in town, you mentioned you have a basketball coach analogy. I'm wondering if you could break that down for our listeners real quick.
Gosh, I know there's a number of them that I use, but one of my favorite ones. People always ask me, "Well, what's your favorite leadership quote?" And I say, "Well, hell, if you really want to get into it, since I have a military history degree, and I love spouting off on great leaders and what they said, because none of this stuff that I talked about tonight is stuff that I invented. It's all stuff that I borrowed from other people. I mean, that's what we do in this business. If somebody's done it smarter or said it better, why am I going to try to reinvent the wheel?" So I go back to a famous quotation by General Eisenhower, who was West Point class in 1915. Obviously, he was the commander of all the Allied forces and gave the speech prior to the D-Day invasion that he planned and led. And he was also our 34th president. But he was West Point class in 1915. And I always say that the greatest leadership quote I've ever heard is this one: "Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something that you need done for the mission because they want to do it." I mean, think about that. I mean, it gives me chills and I've said that quote a gazillion again with a G times. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something that you need done for the mission because they want to do it. I mean, that's leadership. That is leadership. I mean, that's where you learn to command actions, not demand actions. So that's my number one quote. And then I always add the corollary, the basketball one, where I say, and the second quote that I think was one of the greatest leadership quotes of all time was said to me by a woman who had 5 children from 5 different fathers. And I had been involved. I'd been the task force commander on a unit that had sent the father of her youngest child, her 6-year-old, to jail a month prior. And I'm at the Newburgh Boys and Girls Club where I was coaching at the time, which was right in the heart of the neighborhood where I was also the FBI chief for the upstate region in New York State. And so I was policing and living, coaching where I policed, which was a wonderful dynamic because Newburgh at that time was considered the most dangerous city in all of New York State. Not New York City, not the Bronx, not Washington Heights, not Brooklyn or Rochester or Buffalo. It was Newburgh, New York. And so about a couple of weeks after we had done this huge gang takedown, taking down 77 guys and sent them to jail in the Bloods and Latin Kings, including the father of this young child, she shows up at the gym at the end of practice, and I see her. I had never seen her, didn't know who she was. She came up to me after practice, introduced herself, and asked me if I would be willing to coach the child. And I said, well, he's 6. I have a group of, I think there were 9 or 10-year-olds at the time. But, I never want to turn anybody away, especially a single mother who's bringing me one of her kids in Newburgh. I said, heck, I could make him an assistant coach or a team ball boy or whatever and just have him come to practice. And, I'll give him jobs to do. And this is a great way for him to, we all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, right? And so instead of getting swept up into the Bloods or the Latin Kings, let him get swept up into this to be a member of the Boys and Girls Club travel team. And she then continued to go on about who she was and mentioned the boy's father, who I had just, as part of this task force, sent to jail, and he ended up getting a sentence of, I think, 15 years. And I was blown away. And she said, well, Coach, I got to tell you something. The young man that we had sent to jail, he insisted that I bring this young boy up here for you to coach him. And she goes, Coach, remember, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you're a good basketball coach and everything, but everybody around here knows you're a straight shooter. You do the right thing, and they know that you care. And I just thought that was something that really gripped me because it was like, here's a situation where I don't know if the positions have been reversed. If I could have been that gracious or magnanimous to somebody who had, been the architect of a big gang sweep that had sent this kid's father to jail. If somebody had done that, and the positions were reversed, I'm like, wow, what grace and humility that this woman exhibited, and the guy that we sent to jail. So I always say that was a huge leadership lesson for me, a leadership lesson from somebody who wasn't a 5-star general in World War II or the 34th president of the United States, but damn close to what he said was this from a unwed mother of 5 who brought a 6-year-old to a gym to hand him off to a guy who had been a cop that had sent her significant other to jail. That's leadership. That's caring about your people and the mission, and not worrying about pettiness and not worry about things that aren't important. So those are the two quotes that I often use, because they've probably been the two quotes that have impacted me more than any others in my life.
That's awesome. Well, cool. We appreciate it. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Right On Optics. Make sure you go check out rightonoptics.com. You can use our discount code TACTangents to get 15% off. If you're military, law enforcement, public safety, anything like that, you can also get a better discount. Just make sure you let them know that we sent you. We put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th, so make sure you subscribe to get those updates. We've also got an email bulletin that we're doing weekly, the Fast Transients Bulletin. You can sign up for that on our website at tacticaltangents.com. Jim, you got anything else?
That's all I got. I really appreciate you coming on. You reinforce a lot of the ideas that we've been pushing forever, and it's cool to hear it from a guy with cred like yours. It's awesome.
Well, guys, I truly appreciate it. I mean that when I was approached about doing this, I told you, I said there's no way I could say no to you guys, and I appreciate it, and I imagine that you guys are going to do good things going forward in this medium. Once your careers are done, and you ask good questions, you did the proper research to be in a position to ask the right questions, and from what I can tell, you really care. You really care about your jobs, and you care about the public perception of the folks we send into harm's way. So I appreciate it. You did a great job, and thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Well, thanks. We appreciate it. Good talk.